back, and we're 2/3 of the way through. And leading this session is IGS Treasurer and Professor of Communication at Manhattan College, Thom Gencarelli.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry that I had to beg out for part of the festivities today. It's accepted Students' Day at the college, and I had to do my duties to my institution. I'll also, before we start, just say that the laptop that I am on has this unfortunate habit of suddenly shutting down. It actually did so during the opening panel this morning. And if it does that again, I'll just say two things. One, sorry, and two, I'll be back ASAP. I just have to wait until it allows me to boot back up. Unfortunately, I want to just mention that our first speaker today, Chris Mayer, fell ill. And I'm sure that we'll see he has a habit of sending me his stuff for etc. And again, for those of you who don't know, Lance usually mentions that I am the editor of the IGS Journal, etc., a review of general semantics. But I'm sure we'll see Chris's piece in etc. soon enough if he doesn't come to the symposium in the fall and present it there. And so with respect to this panel, The Art of Awareness, the first presenter will be longtime IGS General Semantics Ambassador Milton Dawes. And the title of Milton's talk is Expanding Our Horizons, Language as Metaphor. Milton, take it away.
Thank you, Thom. Hearing me? Yeah. You hearing me? No?
Yeah, we hear you. We do.
Yes.
Okay. So the title of this talk is Expanding Our Horizons, Metaphor and Language as Metaphor. In the publisher's foreword of Bernard Lonergan's book, Insight, A Study of Human Understanding, I came across these words: adapting Husserl's notion of horizon, the phenomenological idea that the vastness or narrowness of the world a person perceives is determined by the vastness or narrowness of their perspectives. Lonergan makes this part and parcel of his theory of knowledge. He claims that a person can alter their perspective, therefore their horizon, by recognizing it as a limitation on their ability to know. They can open themselves to information that would normally be outside their horizon once they understand this limitation. They can use that information to formulate new questions, and in seeking the answers can continue to grow. By thus transcending their limitations, a person is able to expand their knowledge of themselves and consequently of the world. In the mode of structural similarity, we can interpret Husserl's notion of horizon as a metaphor. His philosophical notion of horizon is somewhat like our sea notion, as we see further when we are outside than when we see what when you're in a cove or deep in a cove. Perspectives can be similarly described. Our knowledge, understanding, and epistemology, the meanings we give and accept based on current perspectives, or point of viewing, or ways of seeing and thinking and feeling about things, can also operate as psychological caves, blinders, blocking and anchoring further explorations. Alfred Korzybski, as meta-anthropologist, with his general semantic scientific-based principles, offers us ways we can apply to keep broadening our perspectives and expanding our horizons. Accepting these principles as standards, guides, and tools with constant applications, we could arrive at recognizing the narrowness of many aspects of our current points of viewing and their potential for blocking and anchoring efforts toward further explorations to create more extensive, broader points of viewing toward expanding our horizons and improving our relationships. On page 690 of his seminal book on general semantics, Science and Sanity, Alfred Korzybski cautioned us, we do not realize what tremendous power the structure of a habitual language has. The structure which a language exhibits and impresses on us unconsciously is automatically projected upon the world around us. On page 60 of Science and Sanity, we read unconsciously into the world the structure of the language we use. We can expand on this. We read unconsciously, project into the world, and behave, interact, respond based on the structure of the language we use. A further expansion involving the word structure. Think of the term structure as referring to the relationships on order of bits, pieces, parts, and components. Anything we think of or imagine can be thought of as structure. The world we inhabit, and in many ways inhabit us, can be thought of as a megastructure, a structure of structures of structures. In such a world, the order and relationships we see is based on the narrowness and broadness of our present perceptions. If we are aware that our perceptions of such a world could be anchored in non-conscious prescriptions that the world is the thing and the map is the territory, if we make a radical shift in accepting the principles that the world is not the thing it is about, a map is not the territory it is a map of, if we do that, we find ourselves in a world of metaphor. We could think of metaphors as similes dressed up in shorts. We can think of similes as metaphors undressed, exposed, stretched out. We can think of analogies as metaphors and similes speculatively extended. Based on the limitation of our organism, among other variables, we do not see, experience, nor understand all about any structure, including ourselves. An awareness of this limitation could lead us to perceive that what we say about what we see and experience are representational and metaphoric, pointed to some degree of likeness and structural similarity. In thinking of metaphors, we're thinking in terms of this is not that, but is in some ways like that. Metaphors goes way beyond just being a figure of speech. Beyond grammar, metaphor is also a figure of language and also a figure of speech. Whether we are aware of this or not, metaphors are unavoidable structures of language. A consciousness of metaphor, a perception of the presence of metaphors in our language, an awareness that metaphors are prominent in our communication, our thinking, our ideas, beliefs, meanings, theories, etc., broadens our perception and expands our horizon and will affect our behavior and actions. Language is chock full of decorating metaphors. Metaphors are foundational structures of language. They're also foundational structures of epistemology, communication, or beliefs and theories, the meanings we give, or knowledge and understanding, and so on. As such, we could think of language with its foundation, composition, and the prominence of metaphors. We can think of language as metaphor. We could think of language as a metaphor of metaphors. An appreciation of language as metaphor can take us way beyond or present narrow ways of thinking about things. When we think this is being the same as that, we are identifying. If we take an approach of this is in some ways like that, a metaphorical approach gives us a glimpse of a vast interconnected dimensional, five-dimensional world composed of structural differences and similarities. To the degree that metaphors take us beyond identities to likeness and similarities, we can think of metaphors as transcendentals and therapeutic. In recognizing similarities, we are more likely to avoid conflicts based on identification and fanaticism. We are less likely to become aggressive about a different approach, another's way of thinking and talking about a situation. With a metaphoric approach, we are less likely to react to a different approach as criticism, as an attack on our way, our values, and our person. Metaphors are polymorphous. They are all over the place. You can spot a few in this article. There are busloads of metaphors, all dressed up in euphemisms, irony, satire, sarcasms, comedy, interpretations, documents, definitions, advertisements, maps, explanation, theories, philosophies, beliefs, meanings, stories, articles, truths, you name it. Metaphors are displayed, and in the mood of plays, pantomimes, films, masquerades, and so on. The idea termed meaning in terms of its predominance in our epistemology and our thinking, in our communication and beliefs, meaning deserves special attention as a metaphor. If after thousands of years we have not arrived at an agreement on meaning, meaning could be thought of as a grand stand-in, a metaphor for ignorance, a disguise for what I don't know. This thing could be like this. Who knows? I'm just guessing. We don't know what anything means because things don't have meanings. We give meanings. Metaphors can be characterized as sensual, symbolic, and verbal. Tiny structural symbolic bits representing some aspects, not all, of what there is. And let's not forget poetry. It's in what I call modern poetry that I've found busloads of the most intriguing, paratactic, mind-boggling displays of metaphors. And usually the titles don't give me any clue, although I'm reminded that the word is not the thing it's about. For years, I worked at trying to make sense of what I call modern poetry in my usual grammatical way of parsing and analyzing subject, verb, adverb, adjective, object. I finally arrived at thinking my efforts to understand modern poetry were similar to attempting to understand the order in chaos, the order in quills, the order in jazz and turbulence at the bottom of a waterfall. I am now thinking that these modern poetry metaphoric displays were not to be understood in my usual grammatical way. They were to be wondered about, experienced, felt, and allowed to energize my imagination. Our metaphors as similarities in connecting diverse, seemingly unrelated structures of universe can help us, if we are so aware, broaden our perceptions and make more sense of wider ranges of going on. With the wider perspective based on causal structural similarities, we start to perceive and understand the world in terms of interconnections and similarities. An example, bullying in schools is somewhat structurally similar to bullying at international levels. But at international levels, bullying is called war. From diplomatic perspective, thinking, planning, strategizing, etc., based on the word war, opens a way of avoiding treating murders, horrors, and devastation that war is involved. Human bullying at international levels, that's war. Thinking in terms of structural similarities, involving the more powerful taking advantage of the less powerful, the stronger taking advantage of the weaker, it's not difficult to spot how much and how diverse the bullying that goes on in our world. And keep in mind, there are tons of ways one can be powerful, weaker, or stronger. Not being a structure of everyday language, bullying is all over the place, but not recognized. In the mode of structural similarity, we can interpret person survival as a metaphor. Delete that. Based on the limitations of our organisms, among other variables, we do not see, experience, understand all about anything, including ourselves. An awareness of this limitation could lead us to perceive that what we say about what we say is representative. This is like that. This is not that. The more we apply conscious time binding, which is just different from time binding. We are natural time binders. But what's important, more important, is to recognize that we are time binders. And in that recognition, we can keep expanding the range of our perceptions by applying general semantics principles as guides, critical thinking, reasoning standards, and tools. The more we apply the method of calculus and keep taking steps to expand our horizons, the more likely that we might come to acknowledge the presence and power of metaphors as highly important structures of our consciousness, of our associations, of our communication, our science, our philosophies, the meanings we give, our perceptions, and diverse other ways of being. The more we will see and acknowledge and come to acknowledge language as metaphor, the next time you read or hear something, step into the world of metaphor. Step into the world of similarities. Be transcendental. Whenever you hear or read the word is, add, is like, or somewhat like. How much time I have?
You've got a couple minutes.
Hmm?
You've got a couple more minutes.
Okay. This happens because I, in a mode of non-allness, whenever I write an article, it never finishes. I keep on expanding and thinking about it. And so it creates problems. Up to the last minute, I'm writing something differently. Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned this. A metaphorical approach as an antidote effectively challenge identification. Instead of perceiving and treating at this as being the same as at that, we take a metaphorical approach and think in terms of this is in some ways like that. So this one, metaphors can be characterized as sensual, symbolic, and verbal maps, tiny structural bits representing some aspects, not all, of what is there. The term, etc., the terms, etc., and so on, goings on, and, can be thought of as stand-ins, representations, metaphors in place of that's not all, there's much more. The term ideas I, self, me, for instance, can be thought of as metaphors, as stand-ins, shorts representing a way of being at a time, place, situation, and context. So grammatically, the symbol I referring to a way of being at a time, at a place, in terms of a situation and a context, can also be used to refer to ways of being at another time, another place. The same word I, me, and self refers to being at different times and places. Some individuals experience problems if they do not preserve their organism as a community of different I's, different me's, and different selves. We are not just one self, we are a community of selves. In perceiving their organism as one self, many individuals do not see another I, another self, and another me as referring to other legitimate ways of being at different time, place, situation, and context. The I's, me's, self, these terms are symbols, consider them as maps. They do not refer to one person being the same at all times. They refer to I at this time, me at another times, myself at another times. The I interacting at work with colleagues is not the same I when I'm at home or when I'm on a picnic. They're different I's. So I think I'll end with this one. As we become more aware that we are not aware that words are not the things words are about, the more we might recognize the general narrowness of our points of viewing or perception concepts, the more we might be prompted in the mode of the calculus to keep further explorative steps and keep expanding our points of viewing. The more aware we are of words as concepts and language as concepts, the more steps we might take to expand our horizons. The more we might come to recognize metaphors as fundamental and foundational structures of language, communication, and relationship. And to end, I'll just repeat, the next time you read or come across the word is, think is like, is somewhat like. Thank you.
Thank you, Milton, as always. Absolutely. Our next presenter is someone at least new to me here. I don't know about to the rest of you. Jim Freda, who's listed as an independent scholar here in the United States. And the title of his talk is Anatomical Semantics and Embodied Cognition, the Simple Case of the Shoulder and the Slouch.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Please bear with me while I presented on Monday, and I had a horrible time with my keynote. So I have a set of photos that I want to screen share. Let me see if I can get into that. Screen share. Oh, let me fix this here.
You should see it right.
Yeah, share. And I'm going to choose photos. And then hold on a second. And gosh darn it. Naming slides. That's what I want. And then, pardon my. 20, and then add. I assume that's what I do. Here we go. Thank you so much. How is that going for everyone?
It's there.
Okay, good. And can you see me? Because I don't see me.
Coffee cups. It was from a coffee shop.
Can everyone see my face as I'm presenting?
I can. I got
Okay,
you.
good. Okay, good. I can't see the. So my name is Jim Freda, and I'm a body worker in Portland. As a scholar, I'm a somatic social theorist and a historian, and I'm interested in the historical and cultural determinants of anatomy and how the body interacts with that reflexively. And I'm not a linguistic scholar, and I'm not going to have a very sophisticated linguistic presentation today. It will be anatomical. And I want to call your attention to the realm of the body and anatomy as we think about language and naming, and especially the issue of the map and the territory. And oh, so this is wrong. What is this? This is the last slide. I put my slides in backwards now. Ooh, that's really a problem. How do I operate this? Here. Okay, so pardon me, I'm going to go through all my slides. They're just backwards. Forgive me being so ill-prepared. Here you go. Rectification of names. The title of my talk is The Rectification of Names, the Case of the False Anatomical Shoulder. I changed it as I kind of got closer here. And we're going to be talking about 4 different body parts a lot. And I want to familiarize you with them. I think they're pretty simple. The shoulder, the clavicle, the scapula, and then the shoulder joint. 3 of these, make sure I follow my script. 3 of these are real, and 1 of them is not. And the Oxford English Dictionary of the shoulder is false. Despite its universal acceptance, the shoulder has no actual function in our skeletal structure. It does not exist. There is no bony basis for the shoulder, despite the claims of the profession of shoulder surgery. The shoulder joint is not a valid anatomical structure, and it also, the shoulder joint is a valid anatomical structure, and it also has a proper anatomical name, the glenohumeral joint. Although the shoulder joint is treated as part of the shoulder, it is in simple anatomical truth really only part of the scapula. The shoulder region, despite its importance in medical literature, has no anatomical name and can never have one. There is no shoulder bone. It is simply an impressive shape, topology, or surface anatomy only. Modern medicine has committed this major error because of its symptomatic top-down and reductionist focus. This is associated with the professionalization of shoulder surgery in the 20th century, but is also a historical bias. There is a clear historical debate over the role of the scapula going as far back as James Winslow's 1733, An Anatomical Exposition of the Structure of the Human Body. Winslow pointedly declares the scapula is the principal, or rather only, piece of which the shoulder was formed. The scapula is what we call gross anatomy because it is readily visible and easily palpable. It is not difficult to see, feel, or move. The scapula is obviously the basis of the upper extremity and its center of coordination. While scholars like Ben Kibler are now moving aggressively to affirm this point, the overwhelming bias against it still remains. The Terminologica Anatomica has gone through several major revisions since 1895. Anatomical names are intended to be specific and self-evident. Anatomical specificity is very important for medicine and surgery. The absence of a formal anatomical name for something as major as the shoulder is a serious problem. Greek and Latin terms are used in a systematic way to indicate qualities like size, shape, function, relationship, and quantity. Throughout the chordate phylum, which includes all vertebrates, bodies tend to be organized according to a principle of metameric segmentation, in which structures like limbs and vertebrae are arranged in a linear series of repeating elements. Ordinal priority is a very important principle in the anatomical naming and in kinesiology, reflecting kinesiology is the study of movement, the formal study of movement, reflecting the fact that structures closer to the core tend to have causal priority. This affects the way we understand the attachments of muscles and their actions, with specific roles assigned for origin, insertion, and action based upon relative proximity to the core. Larger muscles and bones are more central and so more causal within the structure. Ordinal priority in the names of muscles and bones reflects their relative importance in the system. For example, larger and more proximal bones are also listed and discussed first as a role in anatomical texts. Their ordinal priority determines whether they take the subject or object position in statements, and whether they are seen as active or passive, important or less important. And what this illustration is Frank Netter's, very commonly used Atlas of Human Anatomy from 1989, but all anatomical texts are going to be like this. In almost all anatomical texts, the clavicle is listed above the scapula. This is an error that we will discuss more in detail below. The conventional anatomy of the human shoulder violates all of these principles. There is no sentence about the kinesiological movement of our skeleton where the shoulder can properly be the subject or object of an action verb. We can carry a bag on our shoulder, but this is not a formal kinesiological statement. Oh, I am so sorry. I'm going to just pause. A little bit of raucousness in my hallway, forgive me. We can carry a bag on our shoulder, but this is not a formal kinesiological statement. It is superficial functional topography. We can place a child on our lap, but there is no such thing in our skeletal anatomy as a lap. Like the lap, when we raise our hands, the shoulder disappears. Although the word shoulder is conventionally used anatomically in every such instance, it is more accurate and importantly, more perceptually meaningful if we use the word scapula instead. Although the shoulder joint is correctly named in anatomical, the shoulder joint is correctly named in anatomical terminology as the glenohumeral joint, reflecting the intersection of the humerus and the glenoid fossa of the scapula. It is incorrectly understood as somehow independent of the scapula and is instead believed to be a part of the shoulder. Superficially, this seems to make sense, but in reality, it is a misnomer. The shoulder joint is just a colloquial name for a very complex and important part of the scapula. The scapula has a number of very different joint surfaces, but the largest and most prominent is what we call the shoulder joint. The glenohumeral joint is a part of the scapula and nothing else, except the arm, of course. And this is a graphic. I'll explain. These are just a few important and telling articles, just as a kind of a random selection. The scapula is treated dismissively and often ignored by medical authorities. It is subordinated to the shoulder joint, to the shoulder, and even to the clavicle. Subordinated. A review of major articles of shoulder surgery shows that the words for the rotator cuff and the shoulder region are typically mentioned dozens of times, while the word scapula occurs only infrequently, if at all. This matters because anatomical specificity is of fundamental importance to shoulder surgery. If we are not talking about the scapula, then we are not talking about actual anatomy. In discussing the upper extremity, Winslow advises, we ought not here to have any regard to the clavicula. It is widely understood that the clavicle does not exist in many species, and even when, quote, absent from birth or removed surgically, much of the mobility of the arm remains. Yet in nearly every anatomical text, in the ordering of the bones of the shoulder, the clavicle is listed first. Vesalius's 1543 Fabrica is a very notable exception. This is because it is understood to have a true joint, meaning a conventional synovial joint, while the scapula is regarded as merely floating on the back of the rib cage in what is called a syndesmosis, or a floating joint. This celebration of the clavicle is hard to understand in light of its obvious anatomical fragility. In his authoritative chapter on the gross anatomy of the shoulder, Chris Job states that the clavicle is, quote, the only skeletal articulation between the upper limb and the axial skeleton. Writing about the clavicle in the authoritative surgical textbook, The Shoulder, Collins et al. Claimed that it is, quote, the limb's only true articulation to the axial skeleton, and the motion of the scapula on the thorax is possible only through the combined motions occurring via the sternoclavicular and acromioclavicular joint. This might make sense, but the scapula is much larger and more powerfully attached to the body than the clavicle, which is easily broken and dislocated. The clavicle has an insecure attachment on the distal ribs at the front of the rib cage in the sternum, in a notch of the sternum. And you can see from this picture, it's very fragile connection and not a basis for something as heavy and powerful as the arm. There is very little good argument for its ordinal priority, other than our historical belief in the shoulder and bias against the scapula. In stark contrast to the clavicle, the scapula is located proximally near the base of the ribs, adjacent to the spine. It has a very powerful and secure attachment to the body. Go back to this one, and you can look at the right side of that image. It has a very powerful and secure attachment to the body, involving an array of 17 different muscles. Although treated dismissively, it makes clear sense to see the scapula as the center of coordination and action in the region, and these are the muscles emanating from the scapula by which it grasps the arm and the torso. Because the scapula has been subordinated in this way, it is viewed as passive kinesiologically. The muscles that attach to the scapula are described as inserting upon and acting causally upon it. For example, the serratus anterior muscles are described as originating on the distal ribs and reaching back around them, holding onto the scapula and maintaining it on the torso. This contradicts the rules of ordinal priority in kinesiological naming, and it makes much more sense to view the powerful bone of the scapula rather than the distal ribs as the origin of these muscles. From this perspective, the scapula is subjective and causal. The scapula is the origin of these muscles, which it uses to actively reach around and hold onto the rib cage. By prioritizing and empowering the scapula, by rectifying ordinal priority, we restore awareness to the body. This has important consequences for our postural structure because the scapula not only is the center of coordination for the arm, but contributes to core stabilization through its powerful relationship with the torso. And I just threw this in because it's cute. And because he's sort of activating his scapula very nicely with his left arm there. The intrinsic muscles of the scapula form the rotator cuff. These muscles attach to the grip-shaped bone of the scapula like a hand. whose fingers are wrapped around the head of the upper arm like fingers grasping a doorknob. In this way, the intrinsic muscles of the scapula maintain centration and stability in the highly mobile but insecure shoulder joint. I hope that's clear. There is an elegant symmetry then between the grip formed consciously in the hand, in the fingers of the hand, and this deep postural foundation that exists in the scapula and the armpit. You can experience this by reaching out to shake hands or to grasp an object nearby while keeping this relationship in mind. The relationship between the grip that we experience interoceptively and posturally in the scapula and that we experience exteroceptively in the hand at the other end of the structure. It is not difficult to sense the scapula in the highly sensitive armpit, which is designed to be intimately felt. According to scholars like Ben Kibler, scapular activation is the simple solution to most common shoulder problems. By returning activation, attention, and subjectivity to the scapula, we energize the region, and it is at the region it is at the center of. In doing so, we naturally and intuitively reverse the structural imbalance responsible for the slouch. Somatically, this is what it means to get a grip. Raising your hands is the easiest cure for the slouch for this reason. And I'm just going to suggest that we do it. Raising the hands activates the muscles of the scapular array on the upper back and balances the tension, counteracts the slouch, lifts the chest, eases breathing, and is a great source of vitality. I recommend it as a daily practice, as a constant practice. Finally, it is important to recognize problems with the efficacy of shoulder surgery. It is becoming increasingly clear that these problems are due to diagnostic and anatomical confusion. A number of studies have found that, statistically speaking, shoulder arthroscopy is no better than no treatment or only exercise. These studies recommend much greater care and diagnosis and the preferential use of non-invasive rehabilitative approaches. Philosophically, it seems that a more structural perspective and the fundamental rectification of names is needed. We'll come to a close. This kind of reversal of priorities is the classical justification for the rectification of names, although perhaps it is novel to apply it to our skeleton. The scapula is one of several major bones related to the deep core body map and the axial line of the body, and each of these major bones has a similar story to tell. Altogether, it is the story of postural collapse syndrome, the body's maladaptive structural response to the long-term effects of environmental mismatch and the global physical inactivity pandemic. So that's me, a couple of my websites, and this is a part, I'm really, really grateful to be here. This is a small part of a larger research project on the body, on anatomy, and specifically on the shoulder. And I was really glad to have a chance to work through this part of the argument. I appreciate it very much. If you're interested in more on this topic, I will be providing a series of related workshops at ProSocial Commons. And that's a project of prosocial.world. And the topic of the workshops is consilience as embodied cognition. And stop my share. And I'm done, and thank you so much for your kind attention.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, sir. I hope that was clear.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Thank you.
And so moving along to make sure we get everyone in. Again, we have someone, I think, who's new to our activities, Elsa Sánchez from Universidad Panamericana in Mexico. And the title of her talk is The Generation Gap, an Obstacle or an Opportunity. Elsa, welcome.
Thank you. May I share my presentation?
You may.
Thank you. Mm. Okay. Well, the generational gap, is it an obstacle or an opportunity? My interest in this issue arises from contemplation. The way we perceive reality significantly affects us and those around us. Walking through the streets of my city, it is inevitable not to notice the evident differences among people wandering around and absorbed in their thoughts. Watching closely, one can see diverse groups of people of all ages and conditions. For example, the elderly contemplating the coming and going of life on the streets, recalling good memories of the past. Their gaze is serene, and they convey a certain wisdom. On the other hand, there are middle-aged people who know that youth is still nearby, but they notice that time is slipping through their fingers. I can sense in them a deep, hidden, illusory desire to remain young. I also notice the lively presence of young people on the streets, who always stands out with their peculiar way of being. They are full of life, often with a carefree and thoughtless budding life, as everything is yet to be done and built, and they have all the time in the world ahead of them. In the face of this scenario, I perceive that we all have something valuable to say and contribute to the world. But today, it seems like an obstacle to communicate and build strong bonds between people of all generations. What explains this lack of generational understanding? The objective of this work is to understand what happens around the generational concept understood from these recent times, for which it is necessary first to explain the current cultural context and identify the necessary elements to advocate for better communication between generations. Just observe the intragenerational misunderstanding in all areas of public and private life, which translates into a lack of deep and meaningful relationships, family disunity, and poor connection between all human groups. The trivial examples of this chronicle illustrate the transcendence and importance of each generation. This issue will be developed from the following sources. First, context will be given from the hyperculture of the philosopher Byung-Chul Han. It will be proposed philosophers Charles Taylor thought about the horizons of significance to improve communication to transmit human values. And generations will be discussed from Dr. Jean Twinge's research. I will begin by defining the newest generations. Young people, the so-called digital natives, who, in words of the concept's creator, Mark Prensky, are all those born in the digital era after the appearance of new technologies. The notion of digital natives arises because these people seem to be inhabitants of another civilization, since, among other things, they have forged their own language and way of thinking and reasoning. The new generations navigate fluently through the internet and emerging technologies, create their content, and expect an instant and immediate response from it. For digital migrants, those born before the technological explosion, it is common to feel obsolete and outdated with the reality today. These generations need help keeping up with the alertness to stay updated with 1,000 of events and cultural changes that happen simultaneously in the blink of an eye. As I mentioned it at the beginning of the presentation, it seems that the true hidden desire of people of all ages is not really to be young, but to remain relevant as human beings. All generations that are digital migrants in some way want to belong to the current world, along with the new generations. Here is the importance of this issue. Many factors alter coexistence and understanding between generations because we face a double gap, the generational one increased by the digital gap. The goal would be to learn that every man and woman has the right and obligation to be people of their own time and therefore must go with it. Raising awareness about the contemporary social cultural context is essential to understand what technology changes brings out to human beings and in their relationships. In the past, the structure of human thought functioned as a linear and punctual sequence in a predictable and controllable world, a solid one, in words of Zygmunt Bauman. This sequence has become obsolete because it is inadequate to current circumstances and needs. Hyperculture, the concept coined by the Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han to describe today's world, explains that everything is united and connected. Instead of linear and punctual sequence thought, human beings today face a system of interwoven thinking that lacks an overarching horizon.
Nice, thank you.
Hyperculture introduces the blurring of boundaries in culture itself, which is why it gradually loses that linear and punctual structure, and as a result, dissolves into a culture omnipresent in space and time that eliminates distances through technology. The outcome of this closeness creates an accumulation of humans' expression forms. The different approaches in space and time make cultures implode into a hyperculture. Then, the mode of knowing, living, and relating to the world changes. According to Han, human beings become tourists. The hypercultural tourist is a tourist at home. They do not have to be physically traveling to be tourists. Even though they are here, they are there, but they do not arrive anywhere definitively. The fact that they do not arrive anywhere definitively causes a problem. Each person expresses in language and action their own hierarchy of values. Therefore, the philosopher states that the horizon that gives meaning hath fallen, and that is characteristic of today. The influence of Taylor's horizons of significance is discouraged by the subjectivism and relativism which women and men have to live with since, due to the surplus of current possibilities, it aims for a life project outside of inheritance and tradition. However, those horizons of significance are noticed in consciousness, which is perceived and identified by recognizing those values. This is how the human being has been historically constituted in community. On the other hand, in her latest publication, Dr. Twenge explains exactly how technologically advancement delimits generations and how each generation defines the life of its members. She states how new technologies have reshaped social interaction and entertainment by simultaneously exposing all generations to the rapid change in culture. Being born today is totally different than at the end of their last century. Faced with this reality, it is easy to see the lack or poor communication among themselves because these changes directly impact humans. In a scenario where 6 generations participate, the goal is to improve understanding among them. With so much technological advancement, the transmission of traditions requires tailored horizons of significance to show human beings that this transmission of values over time is precisely what will keep us human. Dr. Twinge's research infers that human history is not only a chain of experienced events, but it implies in it the cultural flow that corresponds to diversity, beliefs, education, the number of members in the family, the use of time, and the influence of the environment in general. To understand this phenomenon, it is essential to acknowledge that technological advancement is not the only reason that causes the whirlwind of change. There are other factors that intervene and affect it. Indeed, technology also promotes the individualistic trend, but so does the called slower life, which means that it is taking more time to grow and longer to grow old, as well as major phenomena that appear from time to time, changing the way of perceiving the world, such as pandemic, wars, economic setbacks, migrations. All of them are appreciated and experienced very differently depending on the generation to which the subject belongs to. All the factors cause generations to live in that cultural chasm that confuses and discourages them from the possibility of understanding in common points for all of them. These common points are the values that united humankind, given in the horizon of tradition and whose importance resides in giving meaning to life. We should see what we do not see. Perhaps the lack of interest and commitment of these new generations is because they do not quite understand the value of traditions. The horizon of significance will help them to reach somewhere definitively. New generations should have a better disposition for listening to the experiences of others. Old generations will have to socially participate in what their own generation suffers. This is values and experience. They will have to be resilient persons to interact more effectively with young people. Therefore, it is necessary to update the ability to communicate the message empathetically and kindly, which will result in better social communication and will be able to reach with each other. In conclusion, we must turn the generational gap into an opportunity. It is imperative to transmit solid human values. Human beings must be rescued for one reason only, so that it is possible to transmit humanity. Thank you for listening.
Oh, wonderful. And perfect timing also. So thank you so much. We have, I'm seeing applause, not hands raised. Okay. We have 15 minutes for questions for our 3 presenters. I see Alexander. Yeah. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Elsa, if possible. First of all, felicidades, muchas gracias. And I'd like
Yeah.
to ask about that very interesting notion of horizon of significance. So does it differ from one generation, for example, taking into account that theory XYZ, right? So does it differ, for example, from generation X to Z, or is the horizon different? And also, does it differ from the country? So, for example, in one country, there is one horizon of significance, and in some other, there is another, or it is something universal and common for different countries, traditions, people, and so on. So thank you in advance.
Thank you, Alexander. Well, I will try to do my best in my English. I think what philosopher Charles Taylor wants to say with the term that he coined as horizon of significance is not related to some kind of values. It's more like having a horizon of significance, like boundaries, because if not, we can easily go through subjectivism, relativism, individualism. Then what he proposes is to set these boundaries to give a structure to the person. And I think that every country, every family has these traditions, values, but at the end, all human beings, I think we want the same, like peace, happiness, living a good life, helping the others. Then I think that's what Taylor refers to, those horizons of significance. I don't know if I answer well your question.
Well, I guess so. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a comment for Elsa, if I may. Elsa, I really liked your talk, and it made me, the whole time I kept thinking of Gregory Bateson's From Versailles to Cybernetics. Are you familiar with that?
No.
You know, he's one of the original cyberneticists, and he, amongst all of the cyberneticists, he was one of the most prominent social theorists as an anthropologist, of course. And in From Versailles to Cybernetics, he talks a lot about the generational shift from the generation that was there during Versailles and the generation that inherited the world that really made no sense as a result of its violation. And it's a really interesting talk and plays on a lot of themes that you might enjoy. I put a link to his to a YouTube video, which is really just a recording of his original speech. It's fun to listen to in the chat.
Excuse me, I didn't understand the last thing you said. Sorry.
Oh, I put a link to his talk. It was a talk he gave. You can get, it's in his books and it's online, but I put a link to the recording of his spoken delivery of the speech in the chat.
Sí, es
Te va a
para.
dar las referencias. Te va a dar las referencias, los links. Sí.
I'm sorry. Okay, now I know. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
Well, I want to say something. This is my first symposium ever. Then, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to Laura for making me participate. And I'll cherish all the input you put and in what you are telling me. Thank you. I will read all of that.
Laura, I saw your hand up. Do you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, congratulations, Elsa. You did it very well. And this is your first presentation, so wow. And well, I think that it's very important what you said in your presentation about the different people and how all the people think differently. So I think that has a lot to do with general semantics, because Korzybski, just to say, just that, like it is important to understand other points of view, and it is important to understand that we have different generations, and this that we have different ways of see life and significance, and it was great. Congratulations.
Thank you, Laura. Well, I think that you are totally correct. And sometimes when I see people, I think we have very much in common, but technology has made us believe that people of certain age, we are outdated, and we have no value anymore. And I think we have a lot to do with young people, because they know everything, they have a lot of information, but they need like this horizons of significance that could be a professor or a mother or someone that guides them and how to live a good life and how to achieve their goals. Thank you.
Lance, go ahead.
I just wonder about the concept of generation. And I think there's if we look at it as different levels of abstraction, then there are differences in age. So it's certainly the case that there's a difference between being 60 and being 20. Generation in another sense, but that's not generation, that's just that's age, and so there's individual differences there, and of course the differences are much more much magnified when you're very young and start to dissipate more and more the older you get. So say the difference between being 2 and 3 is gigantic. The difference between being 17 and 18 can be significant for other reasons. The difference between being 65 and 66 is meh. But then there's, I think, the idea in biology of generation is that, of, say, the difference between parents and children. When we go through generations, like if you're looking at the genetics of fruit flies and how that they're passed on, then it's about which generation in that filial sense, first generation, second, third, and so forth. And we also use that to refer here in other places to immigrants. So that say my parents were immigrants, so I'm first generation American. But something weird happened, and I'm not sure how far back it goes. Like, I don't really know. Did they really talk about generations in the same way in the 18th and 19th century? Or did it really start with baby boomers? And, right after World War II, the men that survived came back and had got married, and the women had babies, and there was this big baby boom. So we suddenly defined this generation as the baby boomers, and I'm part of that generation, although but then we get into, well, I'm too young to have been part of the hippies, and out on, I didn't do, there weren't college campus protests by the time I got there, and nobody was, or very few people were taking LSD at that point. And, a lot of that was over, and we weren't hippies, but we may have been freaks. We had different language. Um, and then you see that in the chart you put up, I noted that the baby boomers go to 64, but I've seen some people say, no, the baby boom ended in 55 or in 60. And there's no clear cutoff for any of these. And, I said to my son, well, you're a millennial. And he goes, well, I'm almost in, what's it again? What came after the millennials? Gen Z. Yeah, because he was born in 93. But, I mean, in a way, these are very abstract kinds of groupings that don't quite connect to a real concrete reality in a lot of ways. And so we make these generalizations about these generations that I wonder if we're reifying something that we shouldn't be reifying in talking this way about baby boomers versus Gen X versus millennials. And now what is a generation alpha, right? I mean, are there, does it really make sense to put so much store into those generations, those divisions? Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't know if you know Jean Twinge's research about generations. She's been investigating for 30 years, all her life. And I mentioned in my paper that the concept of generation nowadays is not longer the same concept that was supposed to be when we were kids. And it's not longer referred to age. It's more, the use of the term is now referred to the exposure to technology, basically. Then Thom, Gencarelli, you were asking if it wasn't generation, the concept like a marketing concept. I think that what Jean Twenge, and I mentioned her again because she's like the one that knows these matters. She says that the purpose of dividing the generations nowadays is not because of a marketing concept, and not because to make it like complex or to put one generation against the other, but instead to have the opportunity of know where those people come from what technology exposure. I think we all have been looking, like babies today, their exposure is very much larger. I don't know if my English is okay, than maybe a 10-year-old kid. Then what she proposes to know where they come from, where we all come from, what is our exposure to technology or whatever, in order to know better the other, and then create communication between everyone.
I think that we should include big companies and advertisers who, by creating or pushing generation, will have different groups to sell to.
We're running up against the end of our time, but Donnie, you had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I am really enjoying these discussions, and I think with Elsa's, I think that point when you said it's not to stay young, but to remain relevant, I think that's a really important thing for all of us to think about. And I think it's both the generations and the marketing. Teenagers and teen pics, the way the quotes were that these new marketers eye teenagers, the way cattlemen eye cattle. So there's that marketing element, but there's definitely that element that you describe of exposure to technologies as the defining, cutoff points that they use. So I found that really interesting and things I want to read more about and think about. And then as far as Jim's presentation, I was totally fascinated with the anatomy and physiology type of stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you. And when I was really, really sick in the late 90s, I could not lift my arms above my shoulders, and they wanted to do shoulder surgery. And I was like, no, we have to find out why I'm sick. There was a leaky appliance in my home. I was chronically exposed to toxins, and it was affecting inflammation throughout my whole body. And so this is like late 1990s. They just want to go do shoulder surgery, and I'm like, And so watching that,
there are many causes for postural collapse, including toxins in the environment.
oh wow, interesting.
I mean, anything that makes our metabolism collapse is going to do that.
And
including
now
trauma.
at 56, I can lift both arms above my head, which I did during the presentation. So
it shouldn't be a mystery in the age of AI and artificial intelligence and nanotechnology and genetic engineering. Why can't we fix a simple shoulder? I mean, this is something I'm expert on, and it really isn't that hard. And Ben Kibler and many other scholars would agree.
Jim, did you have one more question?
I do. I wanted to direct it to Milton. Milton, I'd like to talk, and I don't see him here, but I don't know where he is. But Milton, are you there, Milton? Maybe he stepped out for a minute. Oh well. Okay. Well, I'll just hold it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Milton's there. He's just blanked the screen.
Milton is there. Yeah, Milton, you talked about how we don't know what things mean and we just create the meaning. And yeah, there's definitely something to that. We can create meaning, and we're meaning-making animals, but we are given meaning. In my opinion, I think it's useful to look at it as we are given meaning by the object of our attention and by the affordances of our bodily interactions with the world and ourself. And the complexity of this interaction is grasped better as metaphoric than as literal or reductionist. So I really did like your talk.
If I can close it and just say one more thing, that Milton opened things by talking about expanding our horizons and then going on to talk about metaphors. And well, what's the metaphor of a horizon? And then Elsa, you came back to this at the end, and I found this interesting because I'm thinking, okay, well, what is the horizon? Horizon is it's a horizontal line, right? And so are we seeking to widen our horizons? Well, no, but it also, it's about what separates above and below, certainly when we talk about two-dimensionality, but it's also about depth, what's in the distance and as far as we can see, to where you want to expand things and see further. But then, Elsa, you gave us Taylor, who refers to it as a boundary. And the idea that we want to expand our boundaries, the boundaries of our thinking and our knowledge, that was perfect for me. And what a great way to wrap it up and tie it together. So I'm going to close with that comment. And we have about 10, 12 minutes before we have the final panel of the day. And again, this was great. Thank you so much to all three of our speakers.